Hey everyone, Coach Mike here, and welcome back to another episode of the Language of Leadership podcast. I'm honored today to be joined by Doug Pflug, the author of Finding Your Granite. He's an executive leadership coach, instructor, mentor, keynote speaker, professional strength and conditioning coach, and all around amazing background and story. Doug, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I know we're catching you on a relaxing holiday weekend with your family. So thanks so much for taking the time. Before we jump into the book and your plethora of amazing leadership experiences, would it be possible for our listeners and our viewers just to get a little bit more briefly about your background? Because we're going to dive in more depth in some of the stories later on.
For sure. I was born in Stratford, Ontario. And as the book says, within the first 2 years of my life, my parents were called in and said to say goodbye to their little boy because I had, at the time, we're looking at 1966 to 1998, two very serious medical situations that the doctors didn't know if I would live. And luckily I did, as you can see here. Had a fairly normal childhood. Grew up as a young man, was one of those guys who grew up wide before I grew up tall. Had a nickname from some good people and some bad people calling you Fatty Pflug. There's some really good life lessons we're going to talk about that I learned how to find some resiliency. And, as we talked about, it wasn't what knocked me down in life. It's what made me go back up. I started high school, not really feeling good about myself, met some amazing mentors along the way, finished as the football, wrestling, and track and field champion, recruited to major universities for all three sports, had the privilege of joining the University of Guelph Griffin football team. I wrestled there nationally for a little bit. I joined the Guelph Police Service, had a great 28-year career there. Along the way, again, met some really neat folks. And now I'm a leadership instructor, coach, counselor, mentor of youth, and hoping that I can pay it forward with some of the life lessons that I went through and give people a template or a roadmap how to get out of their own pit of darkness.
Well, let's unpack that template and roadmap. And let's start with some of the most important questions you ask yourself. So, Doug, these three questions that provide a key framework for the book really sound like they're core to you and your leadership instruction. Who was I? Who am I? Who do I want to be? What do those three questions mean to you?
Well, I look at it, and we're all a product of the experiences that we had once upon a time. So when I look at who I was, that actually formulates and creates the who I am today. But who I am today will not be here tomorrow because we're always hopefully striving for something bigger and better and that pursuit of excellence. So when I go through situations, just to kind of evaluate and reflect, I'm going to go, who was I once upon a time? Look at the growth and focus on the positive situations in life that, even though, there's some very horrific life-altering experiences that I went through, there was always a period of growth. And I've always found that when we reflect on who we were, we can actually see a lot of success because the only time we really succeed is after a really bad situation that happens in life. As we move forward to who we are, don't be comfortable where we are. We see a lot of sports teams that will win a championship, then they don't reflect on how they got there. And then the next year they come out and they did terribly. So, who we are today is almost just a stage in a transition, realizing that who we were got us to who we are today. But then tomorrow, who we were today is actually who we were. But again, as we learn from those life lessons, I kind of use those three different points just to formulate a plan for who I want to be moving forward. From the business world, you always hear, well, what's your succession plan for your 1, 3, 5-year mark? And that's where I took that and I tried to make it in, looking from where I was, where I am, and who I want to be moving forward. Because if we've got a plan, then that's something we can work towards. And even if we're not successful on the end goal, we'll be successful through the pursuit of trying to get to that goal.
What an amazing summary and synthesis. And let's go back to those formative experiences in your childhood. For our listeners here at the Language of Leadership podcast, I always am really passionate about having people share both the ups and the downs of how they got to where they are today. And in the book, you describe them both in detail. Can you share with us just a little bit of your experience with bullies and teachers on the down, but then also some highlights playing football and having some great role models and experiences and leadership there?
Well, for sure. In grade 7, grade 8, I was a fairly chubby kid. I was always told that it was because of some of the very serious medications that I took when I was 2 and 3 years of age to combat. It was called idiosyncratic thrombocytopenic purpura or something like this. But I was one of those boys that grew wide, so I was chubby. And I was in grade 7 or grade 8, and I remember being in class one day, and the teacher, it was first day of class, made fun of my last name, called me Doug Pflug. then, just started to pick on me. And he basically asked where I lived. I told him in Lakeshore Village. He called me a piece of welfare trash. And he said, "Hey, we're going to call you Fatty Pflug. You're a piece of welfare trash. And son, looking at you, you're never going to amount to anything." Because again, I was sloppy. Well, what 13-year-old boy isn't, when you look at it that way? But it was really neat because, that crushed me. I thought I had no value. I thought I had no worth. And then when I go down to the playground, there was a grade 8 student who decided to pick on me, him and his peer group. And they used to take off their leather belts and they'd whip us in our rear ends and make us climb these big, massive maple trees in the yard. And it was funny because our vice principal was a very small man in stature, and he actually was scared of this bully. So, the system was bullying me, and some of the schoolyard kids were bullying me. But it was really cool because I met some really good friends who realized that I wasn't a piece of garbage or a piece of trash. And they started helping me with the transition from going from being Fatty Pflug the loser to actually having some value. And as I moved into high school, I met a gentleman named Mr. John Cater. He was actually a football coach. But I went into high school in grade 9 thinking I was a piece of garbage and I didn't play any sports, and then he saw something in me. He sat down, he invested in me. And as a result of that simple act of kindness that he did, were teaching me that I had value. As I say, by grade 13, I was recruited by many, many major universities for football, for wrestling, and for track. And that's where I look at what we're doing right now. If we can help someone find their inner light and unleash that incredible human potential, that's a gift we can give someone. It's not going to cost us anything.
And in those teenage or adolescent years, as you said, what 13-year-old boy doesn't have their own challenges that they're facing? Mm-hmm. Who did you look up to in those times, or who did you think of as a leader, and who did you model yourself after? Or was it just more of a time when you were sort of looking in every direction, trying to find somebody?
Yeah. I really looked at my parents. They didn't have university degrees. They were blue-collar laborers, and they worked so damn hard to give my brother and I just to meet our needs. The wants every once in a while we got, but we had our basic needs where we had one pair of jeans, but they were always clean. We had 2 or 3 t-shirts, but they were always clean. And mom and dad worked so damn hard that, just through their experience and watching them, I learned what it was like to grind and what you do in the love of your family and the selflessness that they had. On the sports perspective, I always liked football. So there was a guy named Franco Harris, a guy named Jack Lambert that played for the Pittsburgh Steelers when they won 4 Super Bowls. And I always use the one quote that I was told that Jack Lambert said. It was, "You got to stand up for what you believe in life, but realize that sometimes you might be standing alone." But then as you look about that, in our lives, there are positive leaders and there are negative leaders. And sadly, sometimes people will gravitate towards the negative leaders because they've got charisma and they've got a negative purpose. But I always wanted to formulate myself that one day, who am I going to be? I want to be that positive leader that will stand up for adversity, will stand up against bullies, give a voice to those people silenced by addiction, by drugs, by being the victim of physical or sexual violence. Give them a voice. And then once you start standing up, people are going to gravitate to you, so you're not going to stand alone anymore.
Another quotation that you name check in the book is famous NFL coach Vince Lombardi, to which the championship trophy is named after, the Lombardi Trophy. It's not whether you get knocked down, it's whether you get up. What does this quotation mean to you?
Well, I remember there was another bullying situation where 2 guys followed me home from school, and I didn't like to fight. I don't like to fight. I have the physical tools to do that, but I always thought that physical confrontation for me was a failure because we're given a heart, we're given a mind, and we're given our vocabulary. So to fight, that's how we really fight. I remember they followed me home from school one day. It was snow. They beat the living snot out of me, bloody nose and stuff. And I remember laying there in the snow crying, and an adult walked by me and said, "Just get up, get up." And I thought, why should I get up? This person could have helped me. They just saw me get my butt kicked. But it was at that point that I started realizing that, yeah, I've been knocked down, but am I going to lay in the snow here the rest of my life? So I kind of rolled over, got on my hands and knees. And it was in that time that I formally realized inside my body that I don't care what knocks me down, but what's going to make me get up is I do have some value. My parents worked damn hard. And one day I'm going to be somebody. And it was just that desire that I had that one day I'm going to be someone got me up on so many, many times. And as I've gone through my life and had so many experiences, I'll look at what knocked me down. I'll evaluate that, but then I'm going to use that negative aspect or that negative space to make me be successful. And I remember as I came out of the bullying in grade 8, I had we were studying Greek mythology, and they were talking about Pandora's box and how that in that box there was all the evils of the world, and then one of the mythological characters opened up the box, and then all those negative things came out and they affected the world. I took each negative attack on me and I put it in Pandora's box in my mind. And then as I started to work out, I would take one of those situations out. I would remember the devastation it caused me. I would remember the emotions of it. I'm a very emotional person. I remember how angry I was, and instead of that attack that was in anger was used to shut you down, I would use that to motivate me, and I'd pump out a few more reps, or I'd run an extra mile, or I'd run some extra stairs. And that negative attack on me, luckily through my experiences with my family, with some of my early friends, it helped me to focus on what's going to make me get up, and you work towards that.
You had some early leadership experiences in athletics, being, if I can say, one of the star players on your football team. I think, as you write in the book, you barely came off the field the whole season, playing offense, defense, special teams. This took you to university, where you were a star athlete, as you mentioned as well. And from there, you go on to join the police force. What led you to that decision, and what are some of the leadership lessons you learned when you were in the service?
Yeah, I remember when I was about 9 or 10 years of age, this fellow, Charlie Hunter, came by because we lived in some government housing. And I thought, man, this guy's a superhero. He's a police officer. And I remember him sitting there talking to me and asking me questions and trying to bring out who I was going to be in the future. And I thought, what a great role, that I've always wanted to be there for someone. I've always wanted to coach, counsel, or mentor youth. Or, like, I challenge everyone, and I challenge you, try to make one stranger smile per day, or mentor a young person, because you have no idea how those small acts of kindness can unleash some incredible human potential. So when I became a police officer, I thought this would be a great vehicle to combine the teamwork that I learned through my sports career, my education, just in my service to others. And I thought this is going to be a fantastic situation, or a soapbox for which that I'm going to be able to do this. Sadly for me, as my very first staff sergeant was an evil person. The leadership that I experienced there, he told me he didn't like me because I went to university, told me just because I work out, I'm probably just a baby or a wimp. And there was a fairly critical situation where I found a little boy dead in the leaves. And I was laughed at because I had tears in my eyes. And again, all this toxic masculinity that was in policing from the 80s and the post-military era, it was a very toxic environment. So as a result of that, I'll tell people, if you see something good, take it, tweak it, make it your own, make it better. But if you experience bad leadership, do the opposite, because you know how bad you felt. And so this bad leader, I started to do the opposite of him. And I started to really get some leadership capital and leadership credibility as a police officer when going out there in the service of others.
In your time in the police force, did you notice that there was a trend or a change in what type of leadership behaviors were more and less respected?
Yeah, and 100%. Post Second World War, there was that military model where people didn't think; they just did what they were told. I always had a problem with that, because I will follow direction, but if I don't believe in the leader, or I don't believe in the direction, I'm going to ask, as Simon Sinek says, why? Because if I understand why, I'm going to know how and what to do moving forward. I started in 1989, and it was very paramilitary, very toxic masculinity, the strong survive, all that rhetoric. And, we learned the IQ of it, but it was very devoid in the EQ, or the emotional quotient of it. I now teach leadership to a lot of recruit officers and supervisors. As a massive paradigm shift, that the IQ, or that the knowledge of the job, gets you to these situations, but we really have to develop on how we lead. If we can't generate followers, we're not good leaders. So the whole EQ piece of it is learning to talk with people, be empathetic, understand where they're coming from, help them develop themselves. And that's through that process that I came up with my own personal mantra: lead with your best self, model the behavior you seek of others, and always, always, always create an environment where other people can succeed. And once you've done that, then it's time to move forward. But unless you bring those people from underneath you, or that you work for as a leader, up to your standard, then you haven't finished your job.
And just jumping off of that, there was a formative moment in your leadership journey that you write about in the book, when you had the chance to spend some time with the now late E.J. Maguire. And,
Yeah.
and this part of the book really jumped out to me as a big ice hockey fan myself. And you spent some time working as a strength and conditioning coach for a championship level team. And
Mhm.
so I have a quotation here. I want to read it to you, Doug, and have you react to it. So EJ Maguire pulls you aside and says, "Pfluger, sometimes it's not what we say on the bench that leads. It is the confidence the players see in how we conduct ourselves. They always look at me to be strong and consistent. Coaching is not always about the plays or what we say. It is also about the atmosphere that we create." How do you go about creating a positive leadership atmosphere?
That's a good question. I like to kind of qualify it in three things: my heart, my body, and my mind. I'm constantly trying to improve my heart or my knowledge. And we'll go to the body first. I still work out a lot. I'm 55. I still think I'm 18. The body doesn't agree with that. But I want to always create that physical presence. If you walk around and you look confident, then people are going to judge you. And I remember Dad, when I was younger, he said that, actually, when I graduated police college, he said, the world's going to tell you you have one chance at a good first impression. He said, they're lying. You've got three. And I'm thinking, come on, Dad, you had a grade 8 education, not being rude, but he said, when you get out of your police car, if your uniform looks well, it looks pressed, people are going to judge you. So if you want to be treated like a pro, look like a pro. He said, second of all, when you walk through life, and this is what EJ talked about, when you open up your mouth, do you power trip on people? Do you talk down with them? Or do you try to communicate with them using great active listening skills? So your first impression is how you look. And then when you open up your mouth, then you're going to tell people the type of person you are. Do you walk up and say, I'm Sergeant Doug Pflug of the Guelph Police? Or do you walk up and say, hey, my name is Doug Pflug. I'm a sergeant with the Guelph Police. And I challenge everyone to come forward with the person first, because the sergeant, the football player, those are all just hats that we wear. And at the end of the day, it's the person. And then the last piece is just taking care of ourselves. Mental health is very difficult nowadays. And trust me, I wouldn't want to grow up nowadays. It seems a lot harder. But if you go in there and you look good, and you sound well, and then you take care of your mental health, those three pieces, people are going to gravitate to. And there's the old question, and I'm sure you've talked about it, is leadership born or is it charismatic? I believe it's a combination of both. I think that we've been given leadership seeds and they're planted. And as life goes on, we have to cultivate those seeds and keep them developing. And if you want that plant or to be a 100-year tree, that doesn't mean you just grow the tree and you leave it. You've got to still give it nutrients. You've got to take care of it. So when I look at the question with respect to that, I try to look like a professional. I try to sound like a professional. And I always go back to what Dad said, is try to be the type of officer that would show up if grandma fell down the stairs. And that's the same thing I'd say to any leader. Try to be the type of leader that comes up to someone who's fallen down. Be that leader that you would hope would stand and say, hey, let me help you up. Tell me about your day.
Wow. Wow. I hope everyone's taking good notes on that one, because I think that's just it's a perfect example of both taking care of the little things, but also the big ideas, right? As a leader, we need to be mindful, whether it be to tuck our shirt in or press our uniform or spend that time in the gym, in your case, to have that presence that we want, to choose our words carefully, to be thoughtful. I love the way you say speak with people, not speak at people or to people. And then, of course, being able to take care of ourselves as well. So all of this, Doug, brought you to where you are today. So who is Doug Pflug today?
Doug is a guy that wants to increase his legacy, increase his worth. Know that my life that I was here mattered. I go back to a lesson that I was taught through when I went through some counseling for a very post-traumatic stress injury. And Mary Margaret did what she called the tombstone test. What three words would you like to be on your tombstone? How do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as a good person? Do you want to be remembered as someone who is mean? And we've all had situations where someone dies and they're like, okay, whatever. And their funeral, their memorial service is so small you could hold it in a telephone booth if some people remember what those were. Or when you pass, will people say, I am because he gave it to me? And there's a movie called The Bucket List that a lot of people like, with Walter Matthau and Jack Nicholson. And, I'll set people up when I speak and say, did you like the movie? Everyone's like, yeah, it was funny. It was great. It was this. And I'll say, really? This whole speech that I've talked to you is positive, but I hated the movie. Because why are we going to wait till we're terminally ill at 80 years of age to start living life? Live life every second of every day. Invest in others. And the Doug Pflug, once my time is done, I want to sit in my rocking chair and go, man, that was one hell of a ride. And I was given the opportunity to make a change in people's lives. And I just didn't take that torch. I ran with it to the fast of my abilities and realized that I was a has-been. And I talk a lot about, are you a has-been or a never was? There's a lot of people that live unfulfilled lives, and on their day of reckoning, they say, well, I should have. I guarantee I'm not going to say that. The Doug of today is going to be the Doug of tomorrow, who my pursuit of giving of myself to others, if people want it, it's there, because I just want to know that I mattered. But more importantly, I want to know that, or them to know that they mattered. And if I can help them, then that's the legacy that I want to have. So one day when you're gone, you're going to be missed.
And so, in that context, Doug, when you're working with officers, cadets, sergeants, or your clients in your executive leadership coaching, what does it mean for them to rise up and excel?
I just want them to start cutting themselves some slack. In the world today, and this is something I learned through the counseling, is we're all perfectionists. Being a perfectionist is okay, but you got to just kind of tweak that a little bit. I always was a perfectionist towards the end goal, and we're not going to win every situation. But if you can be perfect in the execution towards that, you might not get the end goal, but you're still going to win because it was the process that you went through. When I deal with my clients, I just try to help them go back to who they were. What, and get them to do a self-analysis. What were you successful? Like, let's pick a point in time. How were you successful at that moment? How have you bridged those lessons to evolve to today? And we break it down. And who were you, with a massive self-analysis. And I go through a lot of different pre-canned questions because I want to get to know my people. If I don't know the intricate or the intimacy of your thoughts, how can I better help you? Now, again, it goes back to Simon Sinek. If I know your why, I'm going to know how and what to do moving forward. So with my clients, I just kind of walk them through that process of self-reflection, cut yourself some slack, realize that you're not a bad person. We all fail. We all learn from it. We all grow, and just get them to the point of the self-realization of where I am today. And once they can get that, you find that a lot of calm comes over people where they're fighting and they're grinding so hard, they forget to enjoy the moment of today. Like, I'm still a grinder, but this weekend we hung out on our boat. We just sat and we just relaxed. Great time just to celebrate successes of the past, but even kind of get some ideas for the future. And then I help people as they move forward to who they're going to be. And we set up a plan, and it's based on their core values that we're going to talk about. And mine are honor, integrity, passion, and accountability, and how I template those in everything that I do moving forward. Because at the end of the day, we could leave this podcast and someone could go, I don't like Doug Pflug. And that's okay, because you're not going to win every interaction with people. But in reflection, if I heard that, I can say, well, I treated you with honor, because honor, I like to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Integrity is what you do when no one's watching, because it's easy when the cameras are on to do the right thing. Passion, I think people can get from the video here. And into accountability. I'm accountable to my wife, to my family, to my brothers, or my brother, my kids. We all have a level of accountability. And when we look at the end game, even if I didn't win the trophy, I can still reflect and say, I gave you all that I was, so I never really lost. My day wasn't meant to win that day.
I want to push a little deeper on this one, Doug, because I think it's such a challenge for many leaders. And I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, this is definitely a challenge for me, is that tension or that polarity of accomplishment, achievement, driving, setting goals, hitting goals, with giving yourself some grace, giving yourself a little time and space, and understanding that we're all still works in progress. Um, how do you help people unpack that? Or like, what are some of the questions that you might ask yourself or ask other people to help them sort of figure out where they are and how to manage that situation?
Just to kind of unpack it, I really like gratitude. And the whole world nowadays, it's positive mindset, it's gratitude, and it's about mental health and wellness. Those are kind of the three big things in leadership. So I package it up that way with folks. And I start to ask those questions. And a lot of times the questions hurt. But if I don't ask those questions that hurt, I'm truly not going to get any evaluation of who you are. I'm not going to guide you through some bad path. But if I'm going to take you to a position where you feel down, I'm going to make sure that we build it up. And I think a lot of people are so focused on the end game, and they're so focused on being gratitude for the other, they forget about self-gratitude. They forget about self-reflection. And with a lot of people that way, when you get up in the morning, what do you see in the mirror? No, tell me, what do you see in the mirror? Do you think you're fat? Do you think your hairline's receding? Why don't you look at yourself in the mirror and give yourself a smile? And as I say, we challenge every person to make one stranger smile. Why don't you make yourself smile? And like Admiral McRaven talks about, that's making your bed. Start with one positive. And because everyone's focused on, we'll say if there's 100 points to the game, they focus on the 100th point. But each period through the day, you're getting levels of success. So why don't you show some self-gratitude and say, hey, you did a good job there. Cut yourself some slack. But people just look at the end game too much, and I think they forget. And Simon Sinek even talks about the mountain. People don't want to take the steps to climb the mountain. They still want to get to the top of the mountain, Well, I try to help people find out what each step is to get to the top of the mountain and realize it's a sequence, almost like when you're building a patio in the backyard. You put one paving stone down, you step on that, you put the next one. And next thing you know, when you look behind you, you've got this whole path of 10 or 15 paving stones, and it's a path that's taking you to a spot. But if you look at life, you'll hear the word no. And in this situation, I might build a path and I'm standing there before a 50-foot concrete wall. I'm going to go, my God, that wall is massive. That's that situation, or the symbol of the wall is no. Well, I'm going to take a step, and I teach people to take a step or two back to those positions of success and look and realize that it's only a 3-foot wall. So no is actually next opportunity. So you take a step to the right and you go right around that obstacle and move forward. But sometimes it's that old expression, some people don't see the forest for the trees. I try to help them break it down with some personal positive mindset, some personal gratitude, and some personal reflection. And then they can kind of break it down into smaller parts and again, reevaluate their 1, 3, 5, 7-year plan.
And looking at that next opportunity, or taking a step back and seeing a more broad view about what challenges to take, I think that's also a question that is really challenging for us. As a leader, maybe there are many opportunities available to us, maybe there are few, but committing and deciding to say, I'm going to do X or I'm going to do Y. What is your take on how to make that decision?
I go back to an ethics course that I took a long time ago, and they talk about the bell, the book, and the candle. And when I make these decisions, think about it to yourself. If I make decisions, are the bells in the back of my mind ringing, right? Then you look at the book. How is my decision going to be if it was on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow? And then the candle, how's it going to look by the light of day? So when you make these decisions, personal decisions, is this decision going to look bad tomorrow? What if people knew about it? And again, are the bells ringing? Because those bells ringing, or whatever you might think, the spidey senses, those are all developed from your experience. So I think people need to listen to their spidey sense, or the bells, a little bit more, because that is the product of your successes and your failures that give you the life experience and the resiliency to get to that point.
So it sounds like intuition is, maybe this goes back to the question is, are leaders born or made? But it sounds like intuition, based on your view, is something that for sure we all have some natural degree of, but really it's a product of all of our of all of our past experiences. Almost going back to the question you asked, who was I, that then informs who am I? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it's learned. And all too often people forget, how did we get here? I'm 55 now. I just didn't start now. It wasn't, poof, I got all this knowledge and I've got this wisdom. It's the product of a lot of failures. And I think they said that Michael Jordan took 1,000 shots before he hit the first one, or Reggie Jackson, struck out 10,000 times, but he had the most home runs of any Major League Baseball player. The success always comes from the failure and the lessons learned from that and doing your reps. So that's what we have to do. In today's society, when Google, what's the answer? That's robbing a lot of people the opportunity to develop themselves and work on their critical thinking, their problem solving skills, and the steps taken to get to that spot. So that's where, as leadership coaches, counselors, and mentors, we have to teach people how to break it down in the who were we, who are we, who we want to move forward. Because through society and technology, they're just going to say, Google, how do I become successful? And you're going to get some kind of a definition, but you don't know how to do it. And you've got to go through the experience. You've got to do the reps, step foot by foot, and you've got to go through that journey, or you're not going to get there. I'm lucky after this, my life, I've had a lot of steps, a lot of knockdowns, a lot of pull, get yourself up. And that's where people appreciate that. And it's very sincere. And again, luckily for me, I was a law enforcement officer, strength and conditioning coach, community coach, Special Olympics coach, did a lot of really cool things, met a lot of cool people. So when I come to the plate, I've got a lot of different spheres of influence to draw on, just to help my clients and anyone who wants to improve themselves.
And that learning through experience and ongoing learning is really something that, at least something that I'm learning, is that a lot of leaders take seriously. That ongoing, whether you want to say personal development, professional development, leadership development, spiritual development, whatever bucket or area in your life you want to grow in, this is something that really seems to be a common thread with leaders that I'm speaking with. I know that you take this very seriously, and one of the avenues that you developed your leadership was by achieving quite significant results at Cornell in their leadership development program. Would it be possible to share a little bit about some of your biggest takeaways from the Cornell programs that you took, as well as what other ways do you like to continue to challenge yourself to grow as a leader?
Oh, for sure. The one thing, there was two things that I loved about Cornell is they, we actually got to talk with the instructors through the online portals and stuff like that. It was neat because as a law enforcement officer at the time, I thought our problems were our problems alone. But then when you start to talk to business leaders and just people with a wide array of experience, you start realizing it's the same problems, regardless if you're a banker, if you're a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you're a cop. It's the lack of training and the lack of support of the middle managers. Because the middle managers are a very unique role where you have to influence down, you have to influence laterally to your other supervisor peers, but then you have to influence up to the brass. In that course, they talked a lot about influential leadership, and like Goldsmith talks about, how do we influence our bosses? You can't come with them just with every situation. You have to be a filter. But if you don't go up, then you're going to lose the people beneath you. So that whole 360-degree leadership, that's why back in the day it was iron will, strength, and conditioning. Well, when I started the leadership perspective, it's iron will 360-degree leadership, because leadership should be like a ball. When it goes and hits any surface, it's still going to rebound with some form of energy. So that was the one takeaway that Cornell was awesome for me. But then the one course we talked about was like behavioral interviewing and developing people in the future. Because behavioral interviewing takes past experience, because they say that our past experiences predict what we're going to do in the future. So if people are listening to this, you do it by the STAR acronym. You state the situation. What was it? Who were all the facts and issue? Who were all the parties? What was the issue? The task, well, is it to bring it up to a performance standard? Is it to bring it up to a level of success, personally, professionally, spiritually? Then you look at the actions you took. Were they traditional actions, or were they outside the box thinking? So you look at that. And then the response, or even the evaluation piece at the end, is how did you respond? How did the situation respond to the tasks? So you've got that completion. And with that, we want people to have some outside the box, non-traditional thinking, because that's where we stay fresh. And that's the neat thing. I look at my generation. We need the younger generations, and this whole millennial thing and saying that everyone gets a trophy generation. I don't believe in that, because I think that's almost from a position of jealousy or fear that my generation, when I came into the job, I didn't have a resume. When I came into the job, I didn't have community service because it was a different time. When you look at people that get into jobs now, their resumes, their education, their life experience is 1 billion times more than what I have. So it's incumbent upon middle managers that are getting ready 5, 10 years from retirement, capitalize on those knowledge and those skill sets from those young folks, because that's going to make us all better moving forward. So that's where, the whole situation. So you state your situation, your task, your action, and your response, but always be open to some of those responses, because just because it's not something you think about, it could be the right thing. I remember when I was a media officer back when this Twitter thing started, I went to my chief and I prepared this big, long presentation. And after 5 minutes, he goes, "Do it." I'm like, "But what do you mean?" And this is a guy who'd been a cop for almost 40 years. He says, "Do it." And I'm like, "But I'm not done my presentation yet." He goes, "I get it. Let's do it." But some of my inspectors are like, "This Twitter thing, it's just a fad. It's never going to stick around." They shut it down because of fear. They didn't understand it. But my chief of police, who was nearing his 60s, was very open to concepts. And he said, "Yeah, I can see the value of this." And you look at all the social media platforms that came out back in the day, we don't know if this technology thing's going to stick around, but it has. So learning from that lesson, when you've got a lot of younger folks out there, and that's what the Cornell thing said, is just because we have an age, that doesn't really mean anything. And you look at it with our uniforms. That's your rank. Your name tag is who you are, and your bar is just your resume. So don't just focus in on that. Always stay open to other people's perspectives, because as a team, they always say we're only as strong as our weakest link. Just because someone is young doesn't mean they're a weak link. Realistically, that's a younger person who's probably going to get to your promotional levels far faster than you do. So that's where you bring people to a team together and you work in a common goal for the team.
How do you work in groups that have diverse backgrounds? I feel like this is something that is becoming more of a present issue. Diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. It's an incredibly important issue. And it's something that in roles of leadership, I think is incumbent upon all of us to proactively communicate and execute on. Though it's not always easy. When we have more homogenous cultures, chances are we're going to have less conflict. When we have more heterogeneous cultures, chances are we're going to have more, but ultimately arrive at the best decision for the group. But in between that and the decision, there's going to be some friction. So how do you view on managing that?
I'm an MBTI step 1 and step 2 instructor. So it's the Myers-Briggs Personality Index. It's a tool that I like to use because there's 16 different personalities, and we're all different. But just because we're different doesn't mean we're wrong. If you can learn how to talk with someone, and we said that before, active communication means you sit down, you listen, and you go back and forth. If I could learn how to talk with you better and find out what ways that you make decisions through what times way you bring in information, ways you process information, then I'm going to be able to understand your why, and then I'm going to know how and what to do to move forward. So I like doing that visioning exercise where we'll do the MBTI and we'll start to learn about ourselves from a reflective piece. But then we learn that there's 15 other personality types with us, that those folks are going to come to a team. So let's learn how to communicate and work with each other, because every team has different roles. You're going to have the process person, you're going to have the doers, you're going to have the thinkers, and there's just a whole different things there, roles there. But then you even go through the dynamics of a group where it goes the Tuckman model, the forming, storming, norming, performing, adjoining stage. And if you can walk people through those stages and always find out their why as you go through, that's how we can bring all these different folks together, whether it's a cultural difference, whether it's a religious difference, or whatever makes us different. If we could look at the base level of why we've come together, then we're going to know and learn how to work with each other. And as leaders, always be the last person to talk at the table and hear the ideas from everyone else at the table. We are probably going to be in a situation where we're going to be empowered, because some of the ideas that we think of are going to come from the open dialogue with the group where it's participatory. So we can go, hey, Bob, great idea. Even though that was what I wanted to do, if I come into a meeting and say, we're going to do this, 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 okay, meeting is adjourned, they're going to go, why are we even here? But, that was I think Nelson Mandela said that one time he was with his father, and he said to his dad, how do you become a good leader? He said, well, we always sit in a circle, and I've tried to do that with my groups. And he said, a good leader is always the last one to speak. And you think about when his father was talking about that, there was no social media, there was no technology, there were no computers. It was understanding simple human decency and how we work together.
Who do you look to now as role models for leadership? Mandela is a name that's thrown around a lot. I'm curious as to who you think, wow, that person really is an exceptional leader and role model for you.
There's one gentleman in my life that his name is Mr. Stu Lang. Stu was a benefactor for the university football team. I talk about him in the book. Stu I think he's got his honors degree in engineering from Queen's University, Queen's is kind of like a Harvard of Canada. He played professional football. He won, I think, 5 Grey Cups with the Edmonton Eskimos. He and his brother took over Dad's business 50 years ago, created a multinational business. They sold that. Then his whole goal was him and his wife didn't have any children, so they talked about the legacy piece. So he went and injected himself in different situations where I think he donated $20 million to inner city kids who are excellent academic students, so that they get the Lang Scholars, so they can actually get higher levels of education, even though socioeconomically they can't afford it. He came to our football team and we won a championship under the simple term as all in. That was his buzzword, or his hashtag all in. And it was really neat because when we talk about the millennials, he brought people 17 years of age up to 70 years of age. And through the season, on one given day, at one given moment, we won a championship. Where do you find leaders like that? How do you mobilize over almost 60 years of generational differences? It's by good leadership. His humility is through the charts. He will not accept thank yous because he's always trying to elevate other folks. Because of him, we started our family award to reward university football players when they graduate. It's called the Pflug Family Community Service Award, where if they're giving of themselves to the community, we want to recognize that. So being around a Stu Lang, it's just epic because I want to be like Stu. So it's a situation that I kind of hope someone would say, I want to be like Doug. Well, I want to be like Stu. And even my lovely wife, she is such a great mentor in my life and a barometer for me. She teaches me so many different things. She is an academic. She's got her master's degree in human biology and forensics. For those people who watch TV, she's like Dexter. That's what she teaches, which makes me scared because we have 2 boats. So I got to be really good because I don't want to disappear like some of Dexter's victims. But it's really neat because we are very different people, but we're best of friends. So even that, I look up to her as a mentor as well. And again, my parents are still alive. Dad, we had him over yesterday. He just turned 79. Mom and Dad have taught me so many great lessons in life that we now have an adult relationship where before it was like the son relationship. but just the lessons I learned from them, from Michelle, from Stu, and a lot of the great leaders that come forward. One of my old staff sergeants, Neil Young, we call him Woody. We still talk a lot. I still learn a lot. And, I think we need to inject ourselves or ask a lot of people just to constantly work with us. And just because you're a coach, counselor, mentor yourself, realize that we need that too. And then the last piece is just constantly injecting yourself in people's chaos and helping them create calm. Then we can almost look at ourselves as a mentor too.
Well, Doug, I know you're with your family this weekend, and so don't want to take up too much more of your time, but you did just speak of your wife and her positive influence on you. I know that you also have some principles and rules of engagement. Can you can you just share what the importance of those rules or guidelines with really close people in your life mean to you, and how you go about navigating those rules of engagement?
Sure, she's gonna love watching this. But once I went through my post-traumatic stress injury, I started to learn a lot about myself, and I became the guy that on that given day was when I met her, she gave me the chance for going out for coffee. Well, since then, I've learned so much about myself. I've realized to like myself better because of her. And it's not that I needed her to do that, but she helped in a different way or a different vision of explaining the positives in your life. Well, when we started, we got to a point. Our boat is called Our Rules. So we had our first date on December 21st and had a great time. But it was, Christmas Eve was right around the corner. So I went back to my female friends that were single, and she went back to her male friends that were single. We were both police officers at the time. And they're all like, don't call him tomorrow. It's Christmas Eve. That'd be stalking. So I called her anyways. And I said, Mish, I had a great time. I just want to wish you Merry Christmas. And we had about a 4-hour conversation. And she said, I'm really liking what I'm hearing here. But if we're going to be successful, we have to do this by our rules. And I laughed and I said, yeah, here I was ready to listen to my female friends that were single on Christmas Eve. And you were going to listen to your male friends that were single at that time. So since then, that's become our mantra, where we've got a golf cart named Our Rules. Our first boat was Our Rules. And now we just christened Our Rules 2.0. But the 3 rules that she brought into our relationship were phenomenal. Is that we never end the date we're on till we plan the next date. And you look at it through life. If you and I say, let's go have a drink one day, and how many times do we say that to our friends and it never happens? That shouldn't happen, but it's kind of, it's acceptable. That's just the way lives are busy. She worked a 4-shift rotation. I worked a 3-shift rotation. So there's a lot of times when we wouldn't see each other. So we would always plan for our next date on the date that we're on. One, because it gives us something to look forward to over 10 or 12 days that we wouldn't see each other. But it also gave us a level of accountability to each other. And that's the one lesson that I would say to folks through this podcast. Life is busy for everybody. But if someone dies, you can't get that time back. And that's why it's so important that we never end the date we're on until we plan the next one. The next one that she came out with is, one day I came home, I was having a rough day, because we all have rough days. And I started telling her what had happened. So she started giving me solutions because she loves and cares for me. And I said, why don't you just listen? Like, I don't need your solutions. And then she said, well, why don't you tell me what you want? And I was like, oh my God, I set her up to fail that day because I wanted her to listen, but because she loved me and cared for me and respected me, wanted to give a solution. So when you go home and you do have a bad day and you want to discuss that day with someone, just say, look, what are your thoughts? Knowing that they're going to give you their thoughts. Or would you just listen? And then they'll listen. But when we've got those loved ones who want to help us, or even our coaches, tell people, don't set them up to fail, set them up to succeed for what your expectations are there. This past weekend, she came up with another one. And it was kind of funny because it made sense. I'm a very passionate person, very social. She said, we need to start having down days where we do absolutely nothing. It's just you and me, sit on the boat, maybe go to the gym, just us, no one else. And again, she said, once we do that, once we have that mental health day together, we're never going to stop our mental health day till we plan the next one. And those are the 3 relationships that she's given, or rules that we use together. But I would even extend those to anyone who's listening. When you've got those meaningful relationships with people, take time, because we realize how fluid and how quick life can disappear. So never leave your life. And we said earlier, we want to live a life where it's regret-free. Make sure you take the time to, if you see your parents, never end that date, to have the next date, because one, it'll give you something to look forward to. It makes you accountable, and just get out there and be with those folks more. But those have been the three ways that we've been successful. We've been together 12 years. And we get married, it's our anniversary this year for 10 years. We're actually going on a cruise, and we're going to restate our vows. We're going to be in the South Pacific. So the rules that she came out with, I'm all in. And that's the gift, one of the gifts that I want people to have from this.
Doug, I love that. I love that. I think that's something we can definitely all learn from, whether it be in our romantic relationships or our friendships, our family. It's so practical and so meaningful. And it's clear that it just aligns with your core values as a guy: accountability, honor, and many others. Well, Doug, we're just coming up on time. So where can our listeners and viewers go to find more out about your work?
My website is riseupandexcel.ca. I thought it was I thought it was really neat when I developed that, because as you go through the book, you're going to read my post-traumatic stress injury. And at the bottom of that pit, I was looking for a light on a wall that didn't exist. And I found that light was within myself, and that was based on the core values. And that's where I came up with riseupandexcel.ca. I'm also on Twitter at IronWill360. Instagram's IronWill360. Or like I said, through the website, they can get a hold of me. I'm just starting to develop a bit of a YouTube channel, this TikTok thing I'm trying to learn about, because it's going everywhere. But, and even I'm sure through your podcast, I really would encourage anyone, if they're looking for the book. I'm really proud of the project, because every penny that I raise is going to go to a charity called Veterans and Everyday Heroes, which the link is there. And this book is, for me, I'm not receiving any money for it. The funds will go towards service dogs for our frontline worker, police, fire, ambulance, medical, that may have a post-traumatic stress injury themselves. What I would encourage people, I know you did it through Amazon, but with that, I only get 8% back of the sales from Amazon. If people wanted, they could email me directly. The book, the soft copy is $40 plus shipping. And when I do it that way, I get 35% of the sales. So it allows me to give a greater portion of money towards that charity. So instead of not just to slam Amazon or any of these other portals, but online sales, that's only 8%. If they really want to help me donate to the charity, just contact me. And then what I'll do is I'll just find out through the post office what shipping is. And they can know that, out of the $40 book, I think there's about $16 or $17 goes directly to the charity, which would really make me happy. And then our efforts to assist others and pay it forward can come to fruition.
Amazing. Well, Doug, definitely going to link directly to your site. I'm going to scrap the Amazon link. We're going to go directly to Doug, go to the source, so we can raise as much money as we can for a worthy cause.
Yeah.
Doug, thanks so much. This was inspirational and so motivating. And I think all the listeners and watchers and observers are going to love it.
And if people do want to reach out, I don't mind having a Zoom link. We could do 30 minutes for free, just so that we can see if the relationship would work. It's not a situation that you just get a coach. You have to make sure there's that bond there. And, I'm more than happy to help people through some bad situations.
Thanks, Doug. Really appreciate the time today. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.